All right, so we're back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
And, we always pick some pretty intense stuff to look at.
Uh-huh.
And this one is no different, right?
Yeah, this is a tough one.
We've had three pretty serious aviation incidents.
Yeah, within just a few days of each other, too.
Yeah.
Really close together.
Like less than a week, right?
Uh-huh.
And I know everybody's seeing the headlines, right?
Yeah, front page news everywhere you look.
It's that midair collision over the Potomac, that Learjet crash in Philadelphia, and then an engine issue on a United flight just out of Houston.
Makes you think twice about booking that next flight, huh?
Yeah. So we're going to be looking at reports from Flash Ream News
Okay.
and try to kind of get a sense of, are these just like freak occurrences? Or
Right. Are we seeing a pattern here?
is there something bigger? Yeah.
Because that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. Is there a bigger issue that we should be concerned about?
Absolutely. I mean, just looking at the timeline and the locations, it's definitely eyebrow-raising. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
Let's take each incident one by one, break it down, and see what the facts tell us.
Okay, so let's go back to January 29th
Okay.
to that collision over the Potomac.
Right, the one in D.C.
Yeah. Just an absolute tragedy. 67 people died.
It's hard to even fathom that many lives lost at once.
And they're saying it's the deadliest U.S. air disaster since 2001.
It really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah. And one thing that I thought was interesting
Okay.
was that in one of the reports, they were talking about the black boxes.
Right.
And how the helicopter's black box was like in great condition.
Uh-huh.
But the airliner's voice recorder
Okay.
was damaged by water.
Oh, wow, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. And that seemed odd to me.
It does raise some questions.
Because I thought they were like
Right.
indestructible.
Yeah, they're supposed to be able to withstand just about anything, right?
Right.
So for one to be damaged and the other not.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. There are a couple things that could explain that, though.
Okay.
I mean, maybe the airliner's black box had a problem before the crash.
Right.
Or it could be that the way each aircraft hit the water created a very different environment for the black boxes,
Yeah, that's true.
One might have been shielded somehow while the other wasn't.
Okay, and then there was that whole thing with the altitude data.
Oh, right, where the numbers didn't match up.
Yeah. So the flight data was showing the airliner at like 325 feet,
Uh-huh.
but the tower data had the helicopter at 200.
That's a huge discrepancy.
Yeah, like that's
Over 100 feet.
more than 100 feet difference.
Yeah.
It's like, how is that even possible?
Well, there are a few possibilities. Sometimes you get slight variations in altitude readings, maybe due to the radar systems or the transponders on the aircraft.
Yeah.
But a difference that big, that's definitely a red flag. Could be a problem with the equipment, human error in recording the data, or even something the pilots themselves were doing. Makes you wonder what they were seeing on their instruments.
It really does. Okay, so let's move on to that crash in Philadelphia.
Right, the Learjet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one was January 31st, just 2 days after the D.C. collision.
Ugh, that one was just heartbreaking.
Yeah, 6 people died in that one, including like a young patient and her mother.
I read that they were flying in for medical treatment.
Yeah, they were coming from Mexico.
Just awful.
And there was actually some dash cam footage
Really?
showing the plane going down
Oh, God.
and then exploding.
Must have been terrifying for anyone who saw that.
Oh, absolutely. So when a plane goes down like right after takeoff,
Uh-huh.
what are the usual suspects?
Well, usually it points to some kind of critical failure.
Yeah.
Either mechanical, like an engine problem,
Okay.
or maybe the weight distribution on the plane wasn't right.
Mhm.
Pilot error is also a possibility, especially if there's a sudden emergency they have to deal with.
Right.
And given that there was an explosion, they'll be looking very closely at the fuel system and the engine, trying to rule out any malfunction and this is less likely, but they'll have to consider it, sabotage.
Okay.
You have to cover all the bases.
Right. And I know there's been some talk, given that the victims were Mexican and with everything going on politically.
Yeah, I've seen some of that online.
People are wondering if it could have been targeted,
Right. But we have to be careful with that kind of speculation.
Yeah.
It's important to let the investigators do their job, follow the evidence, and not jump to conclusions.
Yeah, because that could really hurt the investigation.
Exactly. And it could also spread unnecessary fear and anxiety.
That's a good point. Okay, so then we have the Houston incident.
Right, the United flight.
Yeah, that was just on February 2nd. So that was just a couple days after the Learjet crash.
And that was an engine issue, right?
Yeah, they had an engine issue, but everybody got out okay.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. But it's like after everything else that's happened.
It's hard not to feel a little on edge.
Yeah, it just makes you think, like, are
Right.
engine issues like a common thing?
Well, you have to remember that aircraft engines are incredibly complex pieces of machinery.
Okay.
There are so many moving parts. They operate under such extreme conditions
Uh-huh.
that occasionally things are going to go wrong.
Okay.
The good news about the Houston incident is that the safety protocols worked.
Okay.
The crew knew what to do. They stopped the takeoff, and everyone got off the plane safely.
Yeah,
That shows how seriously airlines take these procedures.
that is good to hear. So here we are, 3 incidents, 5 days
Across different states.
across the eastern U.S., yeah. How often does something like this happen?
Statistically speaking, it's pretty rare to have this many incidents in such a short time frame and clustered geographically like this. But it's important to remember correlation doesn't automatically mean causation.
Right.
Just because they happened close together doesn't necessarily mean they're connected. There could be other factors we're not considering, things like increased air traffic because of a holiday,
Right.
or even weather patterns could play a role.
Okay.
It's kind of like if you slip a coin and get heads 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
It's possible, just not very probable.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where does all of this leave us?
That's the big question, isn't it?
We've got the D.C. collision with those questions about the black box and the altitude data.
Right.
Then there's the Philadelphia crash, which is just a terrible tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Houston incident, where thankfully everyone was okay, but it still raises concerns.
Right.
So what should we be thinking about? What should we be taking away from all of this?
Well, if these incidents turn out to be isolated, then it really underscores the importance of having strong safety protocols in place
Right.
and also thorough investigations to understand what went wrong.
Yeah.
But if there is a larger pattern here,
Yeah.
if there's some kind of systemic issue affecting aviation safety, then we need to be asking some tough questions.
Like what?
Well, what are these systemic issues? What can be done to fix them? Who's responsible for making sure those fixes happen?
Yeah.
These are questions we should all be asking, not just as passengers,
Uh-huh.
but as citizens who care about safety and accountability.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think you've given us all a lot to consider,
I hope so.
and we hope everyone listening will keep digging into these incidents and, form their own conclusions.
Absolutely. Stay curious.
Yeah, and thanks for being here for this deep dive.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff, even when it's heavy.
Yeah, well, until next time.
See ya.
Bye.